Um, Sick. All right. So, true cost of an associate. We've already had the conversation, but now we're going to hit record and to have the conversation. We joked about this last week. I think the belief is I'll hire an associate, then I get passive income, and life's going to be breezy. We both know that that's not the case. So, we thought, let's talk about it because I think there's a lot of people that still think that. So, we want to talk about the true cost, not just the financial cost, the energy cost, the stress on the business, the relationships you got to manage. Like, there is so many things that come up when you actually hire an associate. And I think, like we've spoken about the double blow as well, one of the biggest things is that people hire. I think what happens is people get really stressed. They hit their own capacity. At some point, they get the advice of, "Hey, you've hit your capacity. You should get an associate to open up that capacity." And it's like, okay, that logically makes sense. But then the way the associates are sort of built and the pay structures is that there's like this huge gap between where like zero and then covering their own costs. And that gap, let's call it 80 grand, might also be 12 months. So like literally lose money for 12 months. And it's like, if you're not prepared to float that, because that's not passive income, like that's a liability. And if they don't get past that point, if your business model doesn't support that, if your advertising doesn't work for that, it is not a nice place to be. They're kind of the things that we want to talk through. Now, you mentioned to me before you've heard the quote that like if you're going to hire an associate, expect 150K. Can you give us some more context around that one?
Yeah, so an absolute legend over here in WA, Dr. Douglas Heron, who I had the actual great pleasure of the full circle moment sharing a Wonder Nights communication talk with not long ago. He's now retired, but I saw Doug in talk, I think in like 2010. And Doug was talking about back then that if you wanted an associate, that associate was negative until they brought in $150,000 a year just from costs. And I don't think that's changed. In fact, I think that's probably what's gotten worse with most of the models, which is crazy, right? If you imagine that as the forefront, and like this is not today a let's shit on associates or shit on owners. This is just realities for both parties. Because as an owner, you need to know what you're getting into. And as an associate, you also need to know, both for how do you work together to, because at the end of the day, an owner wants to pay their associate as much money as possible, and they want to make as much money as possible as well. It's like you don't take the risk unless you're not trying to improve yourself, but you also want to support them. Either party doing poorly in this affects both parties, and both are not going to have a good time. So this is not a like one's better than the other. This is just a simple like, what do we need to know? Because if you're an associate and you want pay rises, you want to be able to earn more, then you need to know what you're actually returning so you can have that question, bring the numbers to your principal. As the owner, you need to know when to hire and is it working, right? Because both those things are going to steer you down difficult pathways if you don't act appropriately. And, I've got a few DMs open at the moment with practitioners that are like, hey, I put a job ad up, I'm hiring. How do I know if I'm ready? And I'm like, you probably should ask that question before going into the actually like I'm starting to hire. But at least you've all asked now, right? And so like, when do we know we're ready? And I think the simplest way to know that you are ready for a hire is a concept that you created that I am a huge fan of, which is the stability number. So I think we've talked about it before, but do you want to give us the quick recap there, Angus, so we can like lead this in properly?
Yeah. So long story short, where this came from was I saw patterns in data where a really good owner, sole operator, would be at 200 visits a week. Then they'd be at 200 visits a week and they would have an overflow of new patients. So they were like, fine. It was like typical, hey, you should get an associate time. Then as soon as they got the associate, their books just tanked. And it was almost like the practice volume stayed the same and the associate did 50 and the owner did 150. Like nothing actually improved. And then now the owner's paying the associate however much per year. And I was like, what is that? And I could never figure it out. I've always believed that active patient numbers, so you define that by however you want to define it. For me, it would just be like someone who has a future appointment. But some people go a step further and they'll say like someone on a payment plan or a schedule, that sort of stuff. I've always said that if your active patients isn't growing, that's a red flag. That's like a problem. So that's like what I've been working off. Then I've gone down this path, which I'm going down even further now, which is like, what's your product? What do you actually sell? And I think, I don't know, you probably, what, every chiro would agree that there's some level of maintenance, if it's monthly, fortnightly, weekly, whatever. I think that's a shared thing. Even among like the most rehab broy guy, they're still like, yeah, like an adjustment's a good thing. He's probably coming once a month. They agree on that. So with that in mind, it's like, okay, then there's a frequency there. There's like a consistency that can exist. So then tell me, what's your capacity? What do you want to see? Let's say it's 200 visits a week. So if you then wanted to see everyone once a month and you wanted to see 200 a week, let's just say that months are worth 4 weeks a year. You need 800 people. That's like your number, right? Like that's the total active volume that you need. And the average amount of patients per week to achieve that number is 200. And each of those 200 people are coming once a month. So it's like those 800 people come once a month. Over 4 weeks, you got 800 visits. You're hitting your 200 per week and everyone's doing your thing. So your stability number is 1 visit per month. If you do that for like someone who wants to do weekly and they only want 100 people to come once a week, then you need 100 people coming once a week. That's it. And it's like, if you get that, you're stable. If, however, then you want everyone coming once a month and you've only got 400 people who are active on program, then on average, they're coming twice a month, right? Like, so you are aiming for one, but on average, you're getting 2 visits per person per month. That's how it's happening, because some people are in acute phase, some are closer to where you want them to be. So the further away your number is from your goal, which is the stability number, which is like 1 in this example, the bigger the problems are that you feel. So what I think was happening, or what I see happening, is just because you're at 200 visits a week, you might have 100 people coming twice a week. That is actually highly unstable, because if you lose 2 or 3 people, that's potentially 6 visits per week, and then over a 4-week month, that's 24 visits. And that's a significant drop off. So you hire an associate, you give them all the new patients, you still have that churn, your numbers drop by 20, 30, 40. The associates ones only really get up to 50. And then all of a sudden, that's where this problem comes from. So the stability number is basically, what's your end outcome? If it's once a month, cool. How many visits do you want to do a week? 200? Perfect. Your total number's 800 active patients who all come once a month. That's going to give you a stability score of 1. If it's any higher than that, or however far away from that it is, the more unstable your practice is. And if you stop seeing new patients and hire an associate, your numbers will drop by like the churn, basically. And it's like, well, your stability score is telling you how many people you're losing every single week. Don't know if I explained that very well, but that's the concept.
Yeah, it's a great concept. And I think the simplest way to, and I'm just going to come back, it's like active patients per month, like divided by like visits per month, right? If you have 400, like you said, 400 active patients, you did 400 visits for the month, your stability number is 1. And if that is your, like you want once a month, it's a very stable practice. No one is ever really getting to full stability number. I say anything under about, depending on what your week maintenance is, about a 4 is a fairly established practice, right? And I think it shows the acuteness of a practice. And like you said, this is what happens. This is what comes back to my statement about the most dangerous thing in chiropractic or in most businesses is fast growth. Because a lot of people will employ a marketing agency and get rampant growth. You've seen this countless times. This is what you do. And I've had these guys come, they're like, man, I'm maxing out. I can't get people in. I need an associate. And I'm like, all right, well, let's have a look at your stability. And they're like, sweet. I'm seeing, 100 a week across 4. And I'm like, how many active patients have you got? And you're like, 50. You've got 50 patients. So you're seeing everyone twice a week, essentially, through there. So your actual stability number right now is like an 8 up through there. What's your churn rate? So how many people are ceasing care? Let's say it's 10% because it's an acute-based practice. So you've got 10% of that 55 going out. They're each worth 8 visits. There's 40 visits gone. So just to replace that, you need to replace 40 visits a month. And now you might be twice a week for 4 weeks. So that's 5 new patients, but you might have a conversion of 50%. So you need 10 new patients just to maintain that volume. And then, like you said, you then bring on an associate, hand them the majority. Suddenly you're getting 2 new patients. You're churning down. The associate is absolutely bleeding those leads in the sense that they're not getting anything out of it. And that is the double blow. We're having a terrible time.
Yeah, you explained that so much better than I did. So it's total active divided by visits. Yeah, total active divided by visits. Yeah. That'll give you a number.
Yeah. And then the other 2 things that come into it are just simply like you said, your goal and your average conversion and your average recommendation, right? I have what I call the 90% rule. 90% of people are going to fit on a very standardized recommendation. The way you do the interventions is the deviation, but most people are going to be like twice a week for 4 weeks. Let's have it as a base example. And then 10% need less and 10% need more. And so then your average sort of first 30-day visits, so your monthly visits for a new patient, and then if you know how many new patients convert to that, then you sort of have your replacement to churn ratio. And so that's that. So if if you've got an established practice, if you're very close, again, if we go monthly, if you're, 2 visits is your current stability number through there, and you want it to be 1, you're pretty close, and your volume coming through, you might be ready for an associate.
Yeah.
It's a very simple metric, but it's just testing the capacity of the practice. Now, of course, it doesn't take account overheads yet. It doesn't take out into like styles of contract in terms of employee versus facilities and other things like that. It doesn't take into account CAs, wages, and all the other fun stuff that we then need to add on top. But it just gives you the basis of like, can that practice handle an associate? And I think this is really important for associates to sort of understand as well, because usually they're like, well, I'm not an owner yet. I don't need to care about that. But if you're the one who gets thrusted into this practice that's unstable, you're going to get a lot of pressure from your principal to perform at a very extreme level from day one, because they can't afford to have you there. And the number 2, you're potentially going to have to see your principal suddenly go, well, I'm stopping all this stuff. I'm pulling all the new patients back. You're going to have to go do your own work, which you should be doing anyway. So we'll talk about soon. But they should be topping you off. And then suddenly, if you're not motivated to go build, you're left sort of there churning because they have to look after themselves first. And I will judge a owner for taking on someone that when they're ill prepared and they don't have capacity, they don't have stability, and then throwing them under the bus. But I can't judge an owner that has an associate that's not performing and they need to pull things back, because at the end of the day, that business, because the owner can keep it going. And when an owner is seeing the majority of the volume, that stops the overhead being a major issue. So if the owner has to prioritize, like they opened the business, they opened it to look after themselves and pay for themselves and look after their family. Unfortunately, as an associate, you do have to understand that if the shit hits the fan, they will exit you in a heartbeat without a second thought, because that's what they have to do.
Yeah, and there is thought that goes into it.
I can't double.
People dwell over it for a long time. But yeah, as you say, like it is important, and it's what it looks like in practices. You're as an associate looking there going, oh, there's never enough new patients to go around. That's kind of the feeling. And then the action is usually, well, the owner's going to take the majority, regardless if you're doing a good job or not, because if it's a true case of the stability wasn't there, that's what they need to stabilize again. So yeah, that's kind of what that concept is. So to correct that, instead of hitting your capacity visits wise, what you need to do is hit your capacity visits wise, let your demand increase as in like you don't have to service every single new patient. Maybe turn your ad spend down for a little while. Live in that period where you're stable before then you go and hire an associate, because then it'll be a different story. Like if you give yourself 12 months, you probably save up a big cash reserve because this is going to be your most profitable period. Then also you'll build up a new patient reserve, so then it's like, well, when that person comes on, you don't rely on, like, your churn number doesn't affect as much, have as much of an effect on when you hand over patients to a new associate.
Yeah, 100%. There's a concept I teach in the launch, which is called the marketing mix. And so it's a play on a concept taught to me a decade ago by Lawrence Tam. But essentially, when you open a practice, your marketing mix is 100% external, right? Everything you do in terms of marketing is external marketing, because you have no new patients to internally market to, right? All these people are like, I'm just going to do a great job and get referrals. You're seeing 0. 10 referrals from 0 people is 0 referrals. I don't know who forgot to do maths when they were in year 1 here. But the point is, once you get growing, there's a crossover point, and it's usually at about 60% of actual capacity volume that you start to go a lot more internal. And as I say in the launch, you always want to get to about 90 to 95% internal. External never gets turned off, though, because if you want to do associates and things like that, you need external marketing. External marketing being the networking, being the social media, being potentially paid ads, Google, all these things. So if you're stable and then your marketing mix is pushing 80+% internal referral, like you said, now you have a true ability to put someone in. You can ramp up external by maintaining that internal volume, and there's enough to go round. Also, if you've got a wait list, you know, hey, you can't get in with Nathan for another few weeks, but you could get in with Steve earlier, he's here, Nathan's mentoring him personally. We obviously wouldn't put someone in we wouldn't trust. He actually adjust, one of my CAs was like, they adjust Nathan, right? And the person's like, oh, well, if they adjust him, they must be good, so we can get you in sooner. So that allows you to actually like hit that running start. And then as an owner, even if you do this, there will still be some downward churn when you first put on an associate. Like you should aim for sub 20%, sub 10% is great, but it's more from a above the Atlas energy capacity because you are organizing a new person, you're mentoring, you're putting energy into it. There's naturally going to be a little bit of your energy that goes back. And so whether you want to believe and go woo-woo, it's the universe is going to pull you back a little bit to facilitate it, sure, I'm kind of on board with that. Or it's just that your energy's pulled back, so naturally patients will feel that a little bit, and some will sort of exit out just because they don't feel like you're quite as there with them as you could be because you've got other things running, which is why having high quality pre-shift procedures to really get you in the right mindset is perfect. But it is normal to have a temporary drop when you bring on an associate. But like I said, it should be 10, 20 at a max, and it should be quickly recovered once the associate hits their first stagnation point, which is usually somewhere between 30 to 50 visits. They'll hit a point where they go sideways for a week or two while they themselves, as they grow, expand their horizons, and then usually you peak up again, and then they start to go again.
Yeah, so if we talk about that, so the actual cost, so financial cost now, stagnation numbers, that sort of stuff. So I think one of the catches or one of the frustrations in our industry is that we hire someone and they're not profitable from the beginning because of the way that pay structures are organized. It's just how it is. We don't have apprenticeships. We can't pay people like shit. So it's like, what do we do? Like, how do we get through that period? What is the stagnation period? How do you work out the goal? And then how do you work out how to plan for it? Because in my experience, like it used to be about 100 visits a week was break even. In most regional locations, that was full practice and a CA, and then marketing expenses. So you'd break even at that point. And I would go hammer and tongs trying to get someone to 100 in 3 months. Some people just never got past it. They just got to like 95 for years. So, and obviously that's not a profitable practice, but thankfully for them, there was other practices that sort of supported them so they were fine overall as a business. But if you're a solo operator and you've just got an associate and how do you work out, first of all, what they need to get to? And then how do you budget for it and how do you plan for it? Like, what are we looking at? What are the real numbers here?
Yeah. So we have to give associates time, right? There's a level to expect, but as I've had to have this counsel with associates previously, there's also a time we have to admit that this is not going to work out. So they should be hitting a level of profitability within, I would say 6 months is an absolute max. Now, the top heavier your practice in terms of the things you give them, or the marketing, the associates, all that, associates, the CAs, like you probably should be moving faster. If there's less of that, you can probably buy more time. The biggest mistake, and if you're an owner, you better be listening to this right now, is assuming that all you need to do is look at what they brought in compared to what you paid them. That is the worst way to look at the cost of an associate. And that's what 95% of owners do. It's like, well, they brought in $5,000, I paid them 2.5, I made $2.5 grand. There are two major problems with that. One, you do not account for the time in growing a person. So it can take 12 months before you actually break even on an associate, in the sense that you will usually lose money on them for 3 to 6 months. They'll then get profitable, but it takes a while for that profitability to actually equal out. And then you only start actually, I'm going to air quote here for those watching video, making money after that, right? So you have to account the sunk cost going forward. The other side is just not attributing the secondary costs, the indirect costs, to that overhead, right? So I've mentioned it before. This is why I built the associate cost calculator. But like, if I think about, I've just started an associate, right? And let's say we're going to be real kind here. We've managed to get them for their first month to 5K of billings, and they were averaging a $80 office visit. I'm going to do that. They take 50% of their billings. We're going to be nice here. It's probably more than it should be, but they're going to be an employee based with a arrangement. So they get super of 12%. I'm going to say that they are on 38 contacted hours a week, which is full time, despite what most cars
You're
think.
dreaming, mate. Are we going to do a realistic one or not?
All right, let's be nice. I'm going to go to 24 hours right here. That gives you a base floor of about $950 on normal rates. plus leave accountancy. Now, then what's the cost of rent? Now, did you have to take extra space to put this associate on? If you didn't, and you're already paying rent, in this case, like mine, it's a $0 cost, right? But if you've got CA time, they're going to spend a lot of CA time. So in that month, I'm going to be nice and be really like low on this, but let's say there was an extra $500 worth of CA time that went into it. But what's the big one going to be usually? What's the double blow there, Angus? What's the thing we usually add on when we drop an associate in?
The Zuckerberg effect.
Marketing. In marketing costs?
60 bucks a day. That's if you're doing it yourself without any agency.
Yeah. And we're just like, again, and that's no judgment, because if it returns, and I think we've already talked about the marketing numbers that matter, and then other indirect costs. The indirect costs will usually be like cards, maybe you need uniforms, they do needling, all these sort of stuff. So I'm just going to make that nice and be $250 for the month, right? So for your associate, for their first month, they brought in $5,000. You had all your contract hours. The total cost to the practice was $5,867. So their net contribution for the month was negative $867 through there, right? Their total cost was 117% of what they brought in.
And what did you say? Sorry, $5,000 a month.
$5,000 a month, and they're doing an $80 average visit here. So they're not even seeing 100 visits for the month. They're probably doing like 20 a week at this stage.
Yeah, it's close. It's 15 a week.
Yeah. So that can grow, right? So let me just so people can see the example here. If I double that now, and the next month they do 10 grand, they're growing steadily through there. Now we're starting to make 1,300 a month through there. So again, it's a lot of outgoing, and these are very like basic numbers to make $250 a week, but we'll go with it. When does it actually start to split? So now we're going to say they're doing $5,000 a week. So they've gone to 20 grand. They're still out of range of what we like. So our total cost ceiling, we like to be below 55%. They're still at 71%. And our direct costs, we like to stay above, like below 50, and they're sitting at 58%, right? To get them to a point to break this, I'm going to just play violently on these numbers. And as I've said to anyone, if you're listening to this, you can DM me anytime and I'll send this to you. I will not gatekeep this thing. Wow, I'm going to have to keep going. This is going to be astonishing for even myself right here.
I always thought it was about 150 per week is what
So if we do the quick math. So if they do 150 a week, I'm getting my calculator out here, people, because we're in the interest of time, times 80, times 4. Yeah, so they need to basically do about 50K a month. And even then, with those current costings, you're starting to get some good money, but they still don't drop into what would be an ideal margin, right? And so that's the reality of things currently. Now, of course, if super's not there, if it's not an employee, that works out, right? They get just sort of slide into where it needs to be. And so that's the cost of the requirements that come through. So your setup is going to directly change that, how much you give. If you're a non-CA based practice, you're already miles ahead on things, right? But there's a cost for not having CAs. But that's the direct costs. So as an owner, you have to be aware of that. And I think more importantly, as an associate, it becomes even more important to be aware of that, because I see associates, like the amount of mentoring I do with universities and the amount of new grads that think they should be paid 60% employee plus super, that business doesn't exist. And if it does, something is very wrong in the back end. Like I remember sitting down with a new grad 3 years ago now, and he's like, I've got this contract. It's for this practice. They're going to pay me 60%. And I'm like, all right, let me see the contract. And there it was, 60%. And like, so what is the practice? Like, is it established? There's, CA set up, all these things. He said, oh no, they've just taken a room in a GP office. I can use the front desk a little bit. There's a website. I was like, they're paying for marketing. They're doing no marketing. Is there mentoring? They're doing no mentoring. What else you got? He's like, there's a table in the room. I need to bring my own laptop though, but they'll do the CRM. I was like, so basically you're running your own business under their brand? He's like, yeah. And I was like, what about like, is there any patience? He's like, well, the principal wants to step back. He's doing like 70 a week, so he wants to hand off a lot of that. And I was just like, I don't think he's done the maths, because if he hands off that and steps out, they had multiple locations they're trying to run and gives it all to you, that business is going under in a matter of weeks. So I counseled this guy. He took this job. 3 months in, he left because the business wasn't functioning. He was seeing no one because there was no support and he was too early on to really get going. went into a much better supported clinic and is absolutely doing amazing. But the other clinic he went to, I think his pay rate started at like high 30s to 40% and then climbs with things. And he makes more money, works less, and got development. So again, getting caught in the percentage is a problem. But you have to look at this. Like if someone's offering you a really high percentage, there's a high chance that you are basically running your own business for them and they're just taking like an owner's fee, even though you can't take it with you. Or they've not done the maths and you're going to get in there for a few months and that thing is going to erupt around you like you couldn't believe and suddenly you don't have a job.
So basically, it's like if you're, I think just like rough numbers for people, if you have a standard practice with a CA and what I would call heavy overheads, you probably need 100 per week. If you want to
Yeah,
be profitable,
100 per week,
you need to be 150.
100%.
So
Like I
that,
couldn't agree more. Like,
yeah, so then that's like, okay, well, they're just some figures. And it's like, if you're the principal and you're struggling to get above 150 yourself, what are the odds that you're going to duplicate that for the first? That's my first question. And then if you are the principal and you're making up 150, it would be like, then how do I stay? Is there other options here instead of absorbing this massive cost? Like, how can I be more profitable in this situation? So like some things that are coming to my mind now is like it's not necessarily an associateship, it's more like the lease agreements and things that we've spoken about previously. How do we do this? Because we can't just be like, screw the associates, we don't need them because they're the future. So it's like, what's the world that exists where this happens? Because I think what's happened is like, we used to be able to get an associate, pay them like shit, and then it was a profitable activity. Over the years, it's like, it's not happened anymore, and people are still trying to use that old model now. And it's not working for a multitude of reasons. General expenses have gotten more, marketing's gotten more, the associate expects more, all that sort of stuff. So then I suppose this may be speculation. This might be, I don't know, like hypothetical conversation, but it's like, well, what do we do? How do we get profitable in our eyes? Something that flows through my mind a lot is, as you mentioned, like the CA cost is quite expensive. I'm all for staying lean. So I would consider hiring the associate as the CA. You know, like if I'm paying someone a wage, it'd be like, all right, well, you do the 40 hours of work as the CA for me, and then you use the other time to build your book. So then it's like you're getting a bit of a return. Because what I see is like people hire an associate, they work 24 hours a week, but they pay them for 40. Like, how does that work? And obviously you've been through that. So what has guided your path and like, what do we do?
yeah, listen, I think things have changed a lot. And I will, just before we move forward, challenge a little bit the idea that we used to pay associates like shit. I think the 40% standard, if I look at physio, and I've got a lot of mates that are physios that run it, the standard physio wage is still in the like mid 30% plus. So I think chiropractors have actually been paid more. They also, at 40%, you were seeing a lot more volume back in the day. So a associate chiropractors are making huge money. It's just got this concept, I think, as actual practice, people have wanted to see less but make more. The 40% stopped returning, which is why this concept of like paid like shit has sort of come through. I think the real thing that made people feel like they weren't getting paid well is that there's always been a cap in that you could only see so many. And then it was sort of like, well, what's the next step? And naturally, chiropractors, I find, are very entrepreneurial. And so they hit this cap and they're like, I need to open my own business, which has always been the thing, which I think we've improved now with some buy-in options and things like that. But to get to the question, like, how do we do this profitably? I mean, when you first brought this idea to me, the idea of the associate as the CA, I was originally just, hell no. The more I think about it, the more it's a potentially viable option. Now, the challenge with it is that you have to make that decision before you look at any hiring. Like you're growing, you're focusing on getting stable, and you're needing a CA, and you're like, do I actually just focus on where I'm at now? And then when I want to move, I bring on the associate. And so I would bring on, if I was going to do it, I'd bring on a full-time associate, but they work my hours. So say I'm doing my 20, 25 hours, because, full-time chiro. They're the CA for that. And then they work their own shifts solo to build their book. And essentially they transition back as the next person comes through. As you bring the next person, there's going to be a cap where now having a standalone CA is viable.
Yeah.
So a lot of the mass now are sort of like standalone CA, multiple associates. Basically, the practice needs to cross 400 visits a week, and that's the sort of viability to move across. Now, an associate may be like, yeah, I'm a qualified chiropractor, I should be doing this and that. That's dandy, but that may not be the option. And what do you get by doing this? You get to understand the inner workings of how practice works. Like I make most of my associates do shifts solo So they learn the workings, because what happens if your CA calls in sick? And you can't replace them? You need to know how to do this. If you're going to open your own practice one day, you need to know how to do this. And you can't know if you've never done it. So you're actually getting benefit. You're getting a standardized wage, and they could have you there, and then you could have a facilities agreement go alongside it, or you could have it as an overlay on it. And then you have set shifts that you are growing. You also get to meet more people, and they refer to you more. It's just a different model. And I think for someone who's more long-term sighted in their career than short-term, this could be actually very, very viable. All right? I think that's one way to do it. The other way would be to move to more of a VA-based model. I use a bit of VA in my practice. There's a lot of practices that do it. So have a virtual assistant.
Angus has got before we go on to the virtual assistant, let's go more on this. So I think I just want to touch on the associate. The idea of the associate not wanting to learn the phones and stuff. What are we doing? First of all, who do you think you are if you're too good to answer your own phone? If you're going to start your own practice one day, guess what? You're going to scrub your own shit off your own toilet. That's how it is. So it's like, I don't know why we come out and people are like, I don't want to do this yet. I'm better than that. I remember having a feeling like that, but then it's just like, you just have to learn it. So if you truly you want to come out, you want to be an entrepreneur, embrace the hustle, learn the whole system. And if you don't know how to answer a phone or process a DVA, how are you going to do it when you're in your own practice? And it's way more stressful. You got no one there to guide you. It's like that mindset's got to go, because it's just dumb. I know what the problem is, but it's like if someone said, okay, I pay you for 48 hours a week, 40 hours a week, and you're working 20 on this job, you go do this job now. That's what the job is. Congratulations. Go and learn it and take it as an opportunity to just get better. Like an associateship from an associate's eyes should be an absolute opportunity to learn on someone else's behalf. Or I don't know what the word is for that, but that I just can't.
On their money, on their dollar.
On their dollar, yeah. I just cannot get that concept. It's like you're there to learn everything.
I think there's two things on it, and I feel pretty similar about it. If you couldn't do it as an associate, you're not going to do it for yourself. And there's a lot of, once you put your back into it, get going, you'll do it. Listen, I've been around for a while now, and I don't want to be old man yelling at cloud again, because my age still starts with a 3. We're not quite there on the 4 yet, but the point is, I have seen multiple people who refuse to do this stuff as associates. We're like, no, I just need to open their own practice, and then sit there and hope someone comes through, not even have a phone, and then just text only because they don't like talking to people, or they won't make the calls. And then now they aren't chiropractors anymore. So I think it's a real shining light on whether you've got a future in this profession. But yeah, if you don't, the other thing, the benefits of doing it. One of my modules I teach in launch is about, if you go into a CA-based practice, look after the CAs, make sure you can adjust them, make sure you bring them a coffee, because they are the biggest referrers in the practice. They when someone calls in, they're like, hey, I want to see Dr. Nath. Nath's booked out for a couple of weeks, but Dr. Dave, who's me, I'm looking after the phone today. I'm here as well. I look after Nath himself. I could get you in tomorrow if you want. And they're like, hell yeah, let's go. You'll build yourself faster. So you get to optimize for that, and you get the benefits. It's essentially getting a business internship whilst also growing that clinical one. So it's a really interesting thing that people don't want to do it, but I'm not surprised, because we're further and further getting into a time where people don't like calling, have trouble talking to people in a profession that is all talking to people. I literally heard a patient the other day, was like, it is 7:45 in the morning, because I was fired up, was going. She said to us, I was like, is he like this the whole time? Is he just going to be talking like this for the next 5 hours? She's, yep, it's uncontrollable. And I'm just like, I'm having a great time. You have to talk to people. So you need to do that. And then I might have again been speaking to a clinician I know at a university that remained nameless. And they were telling me, because one of the things I noticed in my final sort of stints at Murdoch, because I just don't have the time to be there anymore, is that students wanted less and less feedback on their skills. When I went through, we hassled clinicians nonstop for more and more feedback on adjusting, because we wanted to be as good as possible. Now students seem to be it seems like we've got a time where people are afraid of feedback, which is really weird in the university system, and they don't want feedback. And in fact, I'm aware that people have given students feedback, and the students have complained to the heads of discipline for feeling bullied by getting feedback. Now, we're going to do a podcast on red flags as a student that I know you won't last, and that's number 1 right there. If you complain about getting feedback, you might as well drop out now, Chief, because this is not going to work. Because when your
Yeah.
patient comes in, they're like, "You hurt me." You can't be like, "That's bullying." That's not going to work, right? So
Oh man.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, again, I'm not hanging down on there because there's some absolute gems. If you listen to this right now and you're looking for an associate, there's some absolute weapons coming through over here in WA in Murdoch's final year. Message me. I'd like absolute gems. If I was hiring, I'd be grabbing them. But not the point right now. So coming back to that, you just got to do the work. Now, if you've already got a CA and you're hiring, you may have to look at different options. Now, again, do you like your CA? Are they doing a good job? Could you change the system? Are you a big practice? You're running double CAs. Could you have a CA and a VA? The hybrid model, which is what I run for a lot of things. The VA is much more affordable. I've got local VAs. They basically just handle the phone, email, and then I have a like person in practice that manages people. But there's a lot of practice, they don't even have that. VA has their phone, has their inbox, and they just handle things while you manage inside the practice. It is much more viable and then allows for that side of things. And then again, why that associate is growing, they can still manage the front desk on their shifts, so you don't need the VA, and they can learn that skill. So that can work as well. If you want to go full tech, you can just have a AI receptionist. They're not great, but they're not terrible, and they probably cost you $50 a month. And so everything, there are no solutions, there are just compromises in life. And so you just have to accept what compromises you're willing to do. If you really want, you can go right outside the old standard. I know of a practice. Now it's in the US, and as we know, the US, all rules are different in all aspects of things. But there is a practice, I believe this practice is in Miami, was a solo practice, a female practitioner, has 3 kids. I don't think dad's around. Can't remember exactly why, but so she only works a couple of days. This practice sees, I think, like 150 plus visits a week in those couple of shifts. The first thing you learn when you come in as a new patient is how to answer the phone and book a new patient. Her patients that are waiting in the reception are her CAs, which is wild. But imagine this, right? You come in, someone books you, you come through, and they're like, "Hey, I'm another one of the patients here, but we support the principal here, and so this is how you book a patient." So someone calls and the phone's ringing, you're welcome to answer it, and this is all you need to do to get that person booked in. But imagine you are booking, right? I'm ringing up, I'm like, "Oh, Hat Chiropractic, calling up through here," and Jane answers, and she's like, "Oh, how you doing there? Hey, are you the receptionist?" She's like, "No, actually, I go here. It's an amazing practice. I love seeing Dr. Angus. You're going to love it here. We just support him because he's such a legend. Let me get you booked in." What a wild concept. And if you could make that work at no cost, you also have the best group of people supporting you to do it. Now, whether it would work in Australia or not, I don't know. But the point is, there's more outside the box ideas than people, I think, give credit for when it comes to these kind of costs.
Yeah, you don't have to have like the logic isn't open, hire CA, hire marketing agency, hire associate, hire mark. Like you don't have to do that. That's like there's more than one way to what is it? Skin? No, what's the saying?
Skin the cat, which I don't know
Oh,
where that comes from, but
yeah, that's a bit anyway. So yeah, it's like there's so many different out of the box ideas, and like a lot of the time, the profitability probably comes from understanding the model and then whatever model suits you. You know, you see 50 a week, you're a solo doc on a low overheads, high profitability. You don't need a CA and an associate. So it's like maybe it's better off to have a lease agreement where you're only there 20 hours a week, so then hire the other 20 hours to the other guy. There's so many different ways to do this. And I think the idea of like, oh yeah, cool, I'm going to hire an associate and step out, I think that's been and gone. I think it's a dead concept, if I'm honest. And we can go into why we think it's dumb as well, like why you're trying to get out of your own practice. But the overarching concept here is that you don't just hire an associate and then start making 5K a month profit, as you've proven multiple different ways. So there is multiple factors, marketing's one, the double blow, hiring an agency and hiring an associate because you feel like you're full and your stability scores are down. If you have already got a CA and you're like barely breaking even and you're at your capacity and then you think increasing your capacity is going to solve the problem, again, no, like it's just going to cost you even more. And that's usually these things lead to, as you said, it's like the principal's volume goes down, it's absorbed by the new person. So then what the principal does is absorb back the new patients and lets the associate almost starve. That's kind of what happens there. And it is avoidable usually with timing and a decent plan. So then if we, I feel like we might have talked about the negative there. We did say once you sort of get past 150 to that 200 mark, like if that's what the heavier model with a CA, you probably are going to look at profitability there. So it isn't an impossible thing to do. You just need to understand your metrics. You might, if you do a lease agreement, you might pick up $400-500 a week just from renting out a space that you before never considered. So it's like you might take a chunk out of your rent. Like that's profitability as well. What then, like, I suppose as you said, there's so many different ways to do things, and we're stuck in this one. The one is get the associate busy and then I'll step out. Can we stretch our brains any other ways to try and figure out how to make an associate work, or like that, make that relationship work, or, what else can we do?
Well, I think it's like we need to remember this is a true partnership, right? And the goal, I think, step like this. I don't know where the step out came from, and we've whinged about this previously. So I'm like, like the goal of having an associate is again to maximize return on your business, to generally want to help and develop and support the next generation, which we had as owners ourselves, to want to have a team, and then also to have an ability to take potentially holidays and your people are looked after, right? That's the thing. Like step out can be just, I want to take a few more breaks and the practice doesn't have to stop from a sense. Yes, we can use locums for that, things like that. But yeah, you really invested in the team. So looking at that sense, but like I said, I think if we think of this as a more true long-term relationship where you want to work with people, well then how do we set that up? So we've sort of danced around it, but there's going to be two major formats of contracts, really: employees and facility lease agreements. And so basically it's, are they renting the space? Are they an employee of your business? Both can be done absolutely appropriately and legally. You just have to set it up right. And so you might go, hey, listen, I'm not so much bringing on an associate, I'm bringing on a development role. You can rent my space. Like any commercial lease, I may give you some rent free. They can work under your brand or not under your brand. But you eventually, like you said, you get more profitability by minimizing your overhead because they pay for a rental space. They get a lead in because they don't have to pay for equipment, space, fit out. They might be able to use staffing if you've got staffing, so you have a fair agreement. If they're going to use certain things, you may take a 10-15% clip on top of whatever they bring in for the admin. And yeah, so you might get to a point where they cover all your basic overheads and it ramps your profitability. And then for both of you, you can locum back and forth for each other to support each other so you both get benefits out of it. That's one alternative way to look at it these days. The other one might be, yeah, they have an employee, they have a more simple contract, but their contract upgrades over time. So think of it more like a traditional sort of lawyer accountant model where you start as a junior and you step up, and each step up you may be on a set wage, and then you might get percentages at top end, or you might get buy-in rights. So after a certain time, you can buy into the practice and become a co-owner and you get the benefit of everything else. Those are other options. And as principals, I've always argued that I'd rather take less of someone and have them with me long term. And that's why my contracts always had buy-in options. Now, they didn't have to be excised, but we hit that cap within our careers and we want to do something. Well, the best place to do something is usually in the practice you're already in. And so if the setup's right, that can work really well. Some of the best practices I've ever seen work, it was like 3 separate chiropractic entities under a common shell because all the overheads are split and everyone's more profitable and they can cover for each other. It works beautifully. Yet we got this tall poppy syndrome where we're like, everyone must have their own thing and it's my brand. And it's just like, no, that doesn't have to be that way. You can go true sublease just room rate. You can still have a facilities lease agreement which has a percentage overlay and just has to be set up correctly. And there's certain things that you have to allow that person to do of their own accord to make sure it's accurate for a facilities lease. Or you can go employee, but you might have just a set wage model, no percentage overlay, but it grows over time. And then you set KPIs that give them then so they know their next steps to get the return. And there's a lot of ways to do this. It's just like you said, we've just followed the ways that we've come through, but we largely haven't adapted to the time. And most of the people still teaching the old ways have a practice that's so grandfathered in that they've not seen the reality. And like I said, the old model can still work. It just doesn't get profitable until, like, I think that is 400 visit a week margin across the practice. After that, even in society, that wedge, which we've talked about before, of between the margin between profit and cost, starts to open up. But I think there's a lot of ways to make that wedge open up earlier by going a little bit imaginative. And also, I saw a great post the other day, which is like, why in business is our only goal ever to just do more and more? Is there not a point in life where we're kind of like, hey, I'm pretty good here, and I'm going to enjoy more of the outside. And sort of now I'm going to bring someone in that, like I said, I'm just going to offer you this space at a set rate so we can build you up as well. And if we both succeed, I know it's going to be beneficial for both parties.
Yeah. So I think you've nailed it there because it's like we're all entrepreneurial, or the majority of us are. So naturally, if you have like a percentage agreement with someone, at the end of the day, the only thing they're going to negotiate is the percentage. You're always going to feel like someone's taken out of your pie. So it's like that, and I feel like that was the old sort of framework. Now it's so easy to start your own practice. It's almost like if you invested all that time into a wage anyway, got them to 150, 200, then that person in their mind is like, I can do this myself. Like, if we're just going to be honest, that's what they think. And then they have that compounded by the percentage thought, and they're like, fuck, stuff this, I'm out. I'm going to go do it myself. I was just talking to a guy, he makes 200K a year, he sees 200 people a week, he generates 670,000. And it's like, obviously, that guy wants more of that thing. But as we both know, generating 670 and how much you actually make out of it as the owner, it's not that much. They're probably closer to that break even point, but just an example. So it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to look at this and be less selfish, like you've said, where it's like, okay, well, if we all want to work together towards the same thing, yes, as the associate, when you first come out of university, it's scary because it's like you want the set wage. If that's the case, you have to take your medicine and answer the phone because that's the reality. You're getting paid a job. If, however, the owner's like, all right, I want to, you know what you're doing already, we both want to succeed. Let's reduce our expenses and work together in that shell structure, which is probably what I would do, honestly. It's like, well, how does that work? It's just three entities in the one spot. And it's like you have all the expenses and then three entities. All that needs is the billing goes to an individual business. Is that correct?
Well, basically, they have a shell that handles it, and then each entity pays in their equal third, right, or their equal half. So it's you end up just having like, all right, this is Bridget Chiropractic. We all work under it, but over here is the Nathan, Angus, Aaron Chiropractic, and we all feed a third into the expenses over here, right? So it works really, really well, and I don't think it interferes with things. Obviously, you have to know that you can work with like-minded people. You have to have set business like contracts to know how things work. You have to, if you're going to have CAs, they're well trained to make sure that there's an even distribution of any marketing return through there. Like if you do a marketing and one group gets 50 new patients, the other two get 2, well, then that other person should pay their lion's share of that cost, right? Because they got the benefit from it.
Yeah.
So you have to have those agreements, but they're all really like basic sort of stuff. So it's very easy to do. And I think it allows for a lot better things. I mean, as owners, there's the true option to, like I said, people can buy in, but like you can buy out, but stay in the practice, which is the same thing. Essentially, it's like, hey, this associate there is doing, you're paying them 200, they're bringing in 670. Could you sell them part of that practice? Based on standard operation models, their base is worth 50%, probably there. So you go, hey, for 335,000, you get your entire base. You stay within here. This is what overheads cost. So you now this is what the money comes into you is the 670,000. Yeah, you're going to pay that 330, but that's mate, to pay that kind of money to get that kind of return doesn't exist in most businesses. So hell yeah, these are the overheads. This is our agreement. We split them based on this. Go rock and roll. Or so that's them buying themselves out but staying within the entity. They can then bring in their own associates. Or say that practice has multiple associates. Hey, do you want to buy 50% of the practice? The practice is actually doing 1.5 million. You can buy in at 50% and you take this amount here, right? So there's lots of options. It's just you do have to pay to play. Most of the time, getting that opportunity with that ease and also in a model that you basically don't lose anybody, because even if you tried to open up around the corner, which legally you're not usually allowed to do without buying it anyway, but let's say you wanted to do the dark and go do it, there's going to be a large people that don't follow. So you'll make less, cost more. So that extra cost of paying off that loan is usually less than it would have been to just go do your own thing. And you just get to build great relationships and move forward. So I think, as an owner, we need to be less protective. And as an associate, you need to be more looking at the long term of how could you be part of this and move forward, which is why picking where you want to be is so important. I think the caveat on top of this is if you're an associate now and you do want to get paid more, but you're not ready to do ownership, there are two things here, right? One, by understanding the costs associated, and you could sit down with the principal, hey, I would like to look at increasing my percentage or increasing some things. Can we run the maths on what I cost, what I bring in, what we're currently doing? and what we might need to move to these things. So you can work together. And then you can present like a really strong argument as to why you may be worth more. The other thing, if you're going to ask for a pay rise, would be timing. The biggest mistake, and this is where I think we see the big dropout, like usually people are in associateship for like 12, 18 to 24 months, right? They go through the growth cycle, they hit their 100 a week, they stagnate, and then they're like, well, I might as well do it myself. They ask for a raise, and the person's, no, I can't give you a raise. One, as you've just heard, the cost may be more than you think, but they don't account for the learning cycle. So it may have taken 6 months of loss before that owner started getting some return. So that owner may be negative 30, 40, $50,000 on you. That wouldn't be uncommon and like sunk costs to get that associate going. Now that may take another 3 to 6 months to recoup or more. So they get to 12 months, they get to 18 months, and they might only just be breaking even with you. And then you want more. And so they haven't even got to a point yet where you've continued to earn good money and they've actually got rewarded for investing in you and building you. And so this is like one of the things with this, like owners taking on associates, they have to know that they can get the return on it. And so as an associate, sometimes you might have to be like, all right, in 6 months, when you've got return now, we're doing well, let's revisit it. Let's see what we might need to do to get return. I have seen cases where associates went, listen, I actually don't need the CAs. I don't think it adds that much. I'm happy with the VA. I'm happy to run my own front desk, but in return, I want like an extra 5%. And that's a senior person who's already got a built book. And they're like, all right, I'll take away that and I'll give you that. Sweet. You get more, you take more responsibility. Everyone's happy, right? So I think it's, instead of just looking at me from both associate and owner, it's like, how do we do this well? How do I, like, I've invested in you, I've got this thing. How can I get some return on that? And then long term, how do you get the return for the work you have done as well?
Sort of to recap, it's like if you're, I think the idea of having an associate set on a fixed wage forever, boats sort of sailed. So maybe it's, so the associates need to come in and be like, I'm going to provide as much value as I can. If they want to stay long term, and it's like, I want to buy into this practice, then it's like, cool. Every time you get to a specific level, have an open conversation, but know your value. That's the, if you're going to have that convo. But then also equally for the owner, it's like people aren't just going to keep giving you away like half of their income. We have to accept that. If you want them there for a long-term play, you may need to be open to changing the model. And when that conversation comes around, you need to entertain it, or you're going to continue churning through associates because they were never designed as a cash cow. No one likes, it's a service-based business. The product is that person. No one likes giving away half their shit. It's just facts. So on both sides, it can be profitable. It's definitely not a passive income. It's a relationship that you have to manage. But there's so many different ways in which it can be done. It's a matter of fostering that relationship, open communication, and then, as you say, establishing that win-win so that you can work together for as long as you possibly can. But I think, as you said, the core is you got to know you want to be there. You know, like there's no point giving an associate ownership if they're going to just leave in 2 years because it's just messy. But that's probably a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
All right. I reckon we'll wrap that one up there.